meetings this week. I went to Congressman Whitman's and also went to Congressman Bobby Scott's. At Congressman Scott's, I was very disturbed by an answer that he gave. One of the questions was, where in the Constitution does it give you the right to delegate the money for this health care? And at that point, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pocket Constitution. I was like, okay, maybe he's actually going to answer this correctly. He had Article 1, Section 8 highlighted in there and tended to use that as justification because it says that the Constitution provides for the general welfare. The entire room broke out into general applause of, yeah, see, it's in there, so you have to do it. And in the second row, I'm going, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. So what I have for you today, and I'm probably going to go into teacher mode rather than a speech. This is from a book. It's called 33 Questions About American History You're Not Supposed to Ask. It's by Thomas Woods Jr., and he actually addressed this for his question 26. Can the federal government do whatever it thinks will provide for the, quote, general welfare of Americans? And this is what he goes on to explain. And he uses a lot of the quotes from our founding fathers to say, the general welfare does not mean anything that they interpret it to be. It says, another of the phrases by which the Constitution's limitations on the federal government have been circumvented is the so-called General Welfare Clause. And if you pay close attention to this, it also gives you some ammunition, so if somebody else comes back to you with that same idea, you can say, that's not what the Founding Fathers originally had. It says, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution speaks of the power of Congress to lay taxes, quote, to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, unquote. All too often, the clause is said to authorize the federal government to appropriate funds for a wide array of purposes, well beyond the powers specifically granted to the federal government in the rest of Article 1, Section 8, that have the general welfare of the American population as their aim. Does this popular rendition accurately portray the meaning of the General Welfare Clause? Skeptics like Patrick Henry, who feared the clause would one day transform the new government into one of unlimited powers, were assured that the clause would never be interpreted that way, since the federal government would have only those powers, quote, expressly delegated to it. The General Welfare Clause, anti-federalists were told, did not constitute an additional grant of power to the federal government, which was limited to its enumerated powers. That the framers took the trouble to enumerate the federal government's powers testifies against a broad interpretation of the General Welfare Clause. What point would there be in specifically listing the federal government's powers if the General Welfare Clause had already provided the government with an essentially boundless authority to enact whatever it thought would contribute to the people's well-being? If the clause really did bestow plenary spending power upon the new government, what was the purpose of including specific grants of power to, quote, establish post offices and post roads, constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, or purchase dockyards and other needful buildings? The framers were astute enough to realize that just about anything, however oppressive, that a government might choose to do could be justified on the basis of a contrived appeal to the general welfare. These were the very arguments that the likes of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson raised against the expansive interpretation of the clause. In the Federalist Paper number 41, for example, Madison wrote, quote, it has been urged and echoed that the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States amounts to an unlimited commission to exercise every power which may be alleged to be necessary for the common defense or general welfare. But what color can the objection have when a specification of the objects alluded to by these general terms immediately follows and is not even separated by a longer pause than a semicolon? For what purpose could the enumeration of particular powers be inserted if these and all others were meant to be included in the preceding general power. This is all from Madison. Nothing is more natural nor common than first to use a general phrase and then to explain and qualify it by a recital of particulars. But the idea of an enumeration of particulars which neither explain nor qualify the general meaning and can have no other effect than to confound and mislead is an absurdity. Years later, Madison explained, quote, "With respect to the words general welfare, I have always regarded them as qualified by the detail of powers enumerated in the Constitution connected with them. To take them in a literal and unlimited sense would be a metamorphosis of the Constitution into a character which there is a host of proofs was not contemplated by its creators," unquote. In 1792, Madison stated that the Constitution had created, quote, "not an indefinite government deriving its powers from the general terms prefixed to the specific powers, but a limited government tied down to the specified powers which explain and define the general terms. It would be absurd." He went on then, quote, "to say first that Congress may do what they please, and then that they may do this or that particular thing. In fact, the meaning of the general terms in question must either be sought in the subsequent enumeration which limits and details them, or they convert the government from one limited and hitherto supposed to the enumerated powers into a government without any limits at all." So our founding fathers did address this back in the beginning. And what Bobby Scott did was wrong.
That's right.